In turning this design into a puffy foam design, we must first understand the basics of puffy foam. So I'm going to go ahead and start a new design, and we're just going to go ahead and make a long rectangle. Go ahead and generate my stitches. With puffy foam, you don't want a complex fill because that will mat down the foam. It's going to put needle penetrations on top of the foam, and therefore it'll mat it down. Secondly, you want a satin stitch at a very heavy density, because what will happen with the satin stitch is at a high density it will create needle penetrations real close to each other on that puffy foam, and that will allow you to rip the puffy foam away from the stitching. So we put the puffy foam down first and then stitch on top of it. With this example, what I'm going to do is, let's go ahead and zoom in, and we are going to actually change this color to an orange. Press OK. And if we look at this in the 3D mode, we can see that it is a complex fill. With that selected, I am going to go to the property settings, and in the property settings we're going to change it to a satin stitch. First of all, I'll bring my properties to the side. We'll go ahead and hit apply, and you'll see that with a satin stitch, when you have a wide area, it will break up the stitch, and that's according to the maximum stitch length. So we'll go to the satin tab, and I'll show you how to take out that maximum step and just override that completely. If you go to the satin tab at the top, the maximum step is 10 millimeters. So at 10 millimeters, if it goes beyond that, it's going to break up the long stitch. So I'm going to deselect break long stitch and then press apply. You'll see that now I have a long stitch that goes all the way across, and that's what we need for puffy foam. So we're going to go ahead and press OK, and that's kind of our first step, is making sure that it is a satin stitch. I'm going to turn off the 3D view so we can kind of see it underneath, and I'm going to zoom in just on this top part, and what we see here is we've got an underlay. You see that this zigzag underlay. Now with a zigzag underlay, or with any underlay or any traveling stitches at all, it's going to mat down the foam. So we want to get rid of that underlay right there. Let me go ahead and zoom in a little bit more so you can really see it. So there's that underlay, that zigzag underlay. To get rid of that, while I am right click selected on it, I am going to go to the property settings, and a quick way to deselect the underlay is just to left click on use underlay here. I'll go ahead and hit apply. You'll see that change. We'll go ahead and press OK, and now I have no underlay, but I do have a stitch going down the middle of that design. Let me go ahead and zoom the whole design, and that is because my in and out points are at the same ends. What happens is when my in point starts here, it's going to travel up to the top, do the satin stitch, and end down here at the bottom. To see that in action, if I click on the play button here, I'll go ahead and play my stitches, you can see it travels up and then it's going to travel down. So to change this to where you don't have a running stitch in the middle, we would change the in and out points. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the stitch player off, and we're going to right click on this area again, and you can see our in and out points are at the same end. I'm going to zoom out so I can see the whole design, and I want to move them in opposite ends so that our stitching goes in one fluid motion. So I'll take the end point, left click, hold and drag, bring it to the top, let go, and then regenerate. I can zoom in so that you'll see that now I do not have a line going down the middle or stitching going down the middle. I can also go into the stitch player. Let's go ahead and zoom out, play the stitching, and you'll see that it flows from one end to another. So I don't have any underlay stitching or travel stitching. Now, the next thing we need to do is we need to change the density as well as some other properties. So with puffy foam, depending upon the actual height of the puffy foam or how dense it is, we will need to change the density on the stitching. Remember, density is the spacing between the rows of stitching, and if I go down in number, that means I have less space. If I go up in number, I have more space. I want to at least double the density, and if I go to my property settings, I'll go to the satin tab at the top. The density is at 0.40 millimeters. To double it, I would go down to 0.20 millimeters. So I go down in number, about half the number. I'll go ahead and press OK. And once I press OK, my stitch count right now is 529. Whenever I hit the go button, it goes to 1047. So you can see that it did double. So that is now ready for puffy foam to a certain point. So if I go to the stitch player, you can see that it's going to stitch left and right, left and right, left and right at a very, very tight stitch. When you have that tight stitch and it's going left and right, it's going to perforate on the left side and on the right side. We don't have any perforations at the top or the bottom, so that's where capping the edges come in. In order to cap the edges, I'll go get out of the stitch player. There's a couple of different ways to do it, but basically what we need to do is we need to create two segments, one at the top and one at the bottom, with the stitching going in a perpendicular direction, as well as having the same kind of stitch attributes as this area has, a tight density and it flowing from one direction to another. So we'll zoom in here. I'm going to go to my outline view. Now what I will do here is I'll right click on the area. I'll go ahead and copy, left click on copy, and then paste. When I do that, it pastes another one right on top. I'm going to take the bottom layer here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to, in my outline view, I'll go to outline and divide with line. When I choose divide with line, for my capped edge, I will left click on one side, bring the line all the way over, make that nice and straight, left click on the other side. I'll go ahead and scroll down to the bottom here and we'll do the same exact thing. Left click, make that nice and straight, and left click. I'll press enter to end my inputting, and when I press my inputting, I'll press escape. I'll go ahead and generate my stitches, and when I generate my stitches, you'll see that I have more more frames on the left hand side here. I'm going to right click off to the side. I'll zoom out so I can see my whole design. I've got the bottom, middle, and top. So what we need to do is take out the middle, Control Delete, and now I have caps on the bottom and top. Now we have in and out points, and we'll bring them on opposite ends. And if we go ahead and regenerate, we need to make sure we do have trims in between so that it does not have any traveling stitches. Let's go ahead and take this area. I'm just double checking each area, moving the in and out points, and you can see that you have stitching going in a parallel direction, or I'm sorry, in a perpendicular direction. You can see here too that the in and out points are at opposite ends. And now we have capped ends. So now if we go to the stitch player, we'll go ahead and you can see it'll cap the bottom, it'll trim and then cap the top, and then trim again. And we want it to trim because we don't want any traveling stitches on this design. So that's kind of the basics of the puffy foam. Now some extra settings, we'll go ahead and get out of this. Extra settings that we want to do, especially if we're doing things like a P or an S, or not so much an S, but maybe an F, where you'll have several segments going in different directions. So what we'll do here is we'll go to a new design. I'll go ahead to input text, and we'll do an F here, and we'll go ahead and do an Arial black, and we'll go ahead and change that and then press OK. We'll go ahead and hit the go button. And here you can see that we do have the underlay, we have the some traveling stitches here. And what we're going to do with this is let's go ahead and change the settings appropriately. So we'll go to the property settings, we'll go ahead and deselect use underlay, we'll go to the satin tab, and we'll also change the density to 0.20. We'll go ahead and press OK, and when we press OK, or apply, when I hit apply, it's a little bit hard to see, but let's go ahead and press OK and then zoom in on it. We can see that we do have a travel stitch that goes up here, and that's traveling from one segment to another, and you can see that this segment goes in a different direction, and that's the way that it is supposed to go, but we want to get rid of this travel stitch right here. So what we need to do is to actually separate these segments out. I need to go to my outline view, and in my outline view I'll go ahead and go to divide with a line, and when I divide with a line I want to chop off this part of the F. Go ahead and left click and then left click, hit enter to end your inputting. Oh, let's try that again. And when I end my inputting, now when I generate my stitches I now have two pieces, one piece here and one piece here. Now with this second piece, if we look, we can see that we have, several traveling stitches. Now we can go to the out point, bring that over here because our in point is down at the bottom. Hit the go button. We will also input a trim. So after I've generated, I see that I still have this traveling stitches and we need to figure out why. So I'm going to select this area. I'll then go into my my angle settings, and I can see that I do have this angle kind of going up and down here, and usually that occurs when I have a little segment that kind of goes in another way. So I'll go to the outline view, edit outline mode, and I'm going to delete these points right here. And then we'll go ahead and zoom the whole thing. So I've got no points in between the top and bottom here. So when I regenerate it, I'll still have those angles. So I need to reset it. So first let's change it to a complex fill, and then change it to a satin stitch. After I change it to a satin stitch, I need to go back in and change that to the Puffy Foam settings. So we'll go to the property settings, we'll deselect use underlay, and we'll go to the satin tab at the top and change the density. We'll hit apply, press OK, and now you can see, and we'll zoom in, and you can see that there's no traveling stitch. So now we'll look at this one, and I see that my in and out points are on the same end, so let's take the in point and bring it over here. When I look at this design, I see that it does need to have some capped ends. One right here, one right here, and one right here. So I would create the capped ends just like I did with the other piece, the eye that we did. Now one more thing with the Puffy Foam is that you want to eliminate satin stitch shortening. Satin stitch shortening is good when you're doing larger letters or you're doing corners that have on larger areas, because all your stitches won't go to the corner. We are going to eliminate it on Puffy Foam because otherwise part of that Puffy Foam won't perforate properly, and you'll have little kind of stragglers hanging out. So I've selected both these areas. I'm going to go to the stitch settings. We're going to go to the satin tab at the top. We're going to deselect use auto stitch shortening. We're going to hit apply and then OK. So now that our satin stitch shortening is completely out. So now if we look at this design, and we're going to look at just regular satin stitching next to Puffy Foam. What I've already done is I've already separated these areas into segments for fluid stitching. And on the left hand side, this is You know, this is just for a regular garment where you have underlay and things like that. And if we go to the outline view, you can see here that things, whoops, let me go ahead and zoom in here. You know that we'll focus on the word just. Things are connected. You know, if we right click on this area, this whole thing is connected. Although if we look at this one in the Puffy Foam, go ahead and view it in our outline view, you can see that when I right click on certain areas, they are all separated. And you can see that on the left hand side here, you can see I've got way more frames that I do. I have a lot more frames in this one than I do in this one over here. This one I only have 4 frames. This one on the left hand side, let's see, I've got 18 frames. And that's because what we had to do is actually separate them in segments. And in addition to separating them in segments, we had to modify it, or change the stitching order to accommodate for that Puffy Foam on how we would write this. So let's zoom in on the J, and the J itself is 3 pieces by itself. The first piece, if I right click, you can see number 1 is this little piece right here. The second piece, if I left click on frame 2, is this piece at the top. And then third piece, right click here. And so the J is split up into 3 pieces, and in addition to that, it is the in and out points are optimized for Puffy Foam. So if we go into the stitch view, I right click on this part of the J. Actually, this one's not, so I have to bring the end point down there. Generate. And then you see on this, the end point starts here, out point ends here. End point starts here, and the out point ends here. So let's see how that stitches in our stitch sequence, or in our stitch player. So we'll go to the stitch player. We'll go ahead and play the stitches. And as it does that, I can see here I do have a mistake. I need to have a trim there. But you can see it starts at one end, ends at the other, and then goes to here, starts at one end and ends at the other. So you need to make sure there's a nice smooth transition on this. With this, I hadn't done any caps yet, so we need to see what areas may need capping. I'll go ahead and get out of the stitch player, and first, before we do that, let's make sure that I do have trims in between all these areas. An easy way to put trims in between each and every one of these areas, if I left double click on the red color chip, I can click on this little property settings and make sure that trim is selected. I just left click and make sure I have a check mark, a black check mark, not gray, in the trim command, and then press OK. So the piece that needs a cap on the J would be this little section right here. So while we are actually zoomed in, we could do a couple of things. One, we could take this and put a cap on it, but this is a rather small area. It's not very big, so I could also go into my edit outline mode. Let's bring this down, make it more at a point so that we'll have stitches right next to each other. Let's go ahead and hit go. We'll go to our stitch angles, put this stitch angle right next to it, change the stitch angle a little bit. Let's go back to our stitch view, turn off the 3D. Let's go ahead and take the end point, bring it down here, recalculate the stitching. And when I do that, you can see that our stitches get really close to one another. When it does this, it will perforate that foam really well. Because these areas are so thin, we do kind of have the option to do stitch points right next to each other. So the next piece, if we scroll up through here, we could see at the U we would probably want to do the same thing. We either want to do a capped edge right here, but since this is really short and small, I might go in here to my view outline and kind of modify it just by moving the stitch, or moving my points around. Adding a point here, generating and getting my stitch points as close as possible. Or we can put the cap points. So we need to find the ends of these areas that have, that won't have needle penetrations on the end. So like right here and right here, we would need to put capped corners. And just to revisit that, I'll go ahead and maximize this. We'll zoom this selected object. What I'm going to do with this is I'm just going to go to my outline view. I'll copy it and paste it. It'll paste it right on top, and it actually puts it at the end. I'm going to go ahead and bring that up here right where the first one is. I'm going to take the bottom layer, I'm going to zoom in, and we are then going to go to outline, divide with a line, I'll left click and a left click. I'll then go ahead and go down to the other section, and I will left click, press enter to end inputting, press escape to get out of the tool. Once I'll do that, I'll go ahead and generate my stitches. You'll see you have a little cap there, as well as this big middle piece, and we can see this much better in our outline view. So we've got a capped edge here, and then this middle piece. So with this little middle piece, I'll go ahead and Control Delete. And then I've got the capped edges, and make sure the capped edges stitch before the cover area. So I would do that on all the little pieces, like right here, and right here. I also would do it here, here, and here. I would just probably modify these pieces right here, and then after I do that, we would do a test stitch. You would lay your puffy foam down, and then let the stitching go on top of it. Now, some people do make a template of where the puffy foam is going to go to stitch down before they actually stitch for the puffy foam. And if we'd like to do that, usually the best way for this design would be to just go ahead and digitize a running stitch right in the center of the lettering here. So we're going to go ahead and click on the Create Freehand Line, left click there, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just start with left clicks and right clicks, digitizing right in the middle of it. And you do want this to stitch first, and after you have it stitched first, you also want it to be a separate color. With it being a separate color, you can then program your machine to stop, and then that way, after it stops, you can lay down the puffy foam so that the puffy foam will fall into the correct position. So as we do that, and what we'll do here is I'm just going to go ahead and do the J. I would go ahead and just, actually we'll do the whole just. I should probably be a little bit more zoomed in. That way it'll give me better placement of my stitching. So again, here I'm just making left clicks and right clicks. I'll hit enter to end my inputting, press escape to get out of the tool, and I'm going to change this just to a run stitch, and you can see it's running right on top of my satin stitching. So I'm going to take number 21, which is the last thing that we put in. I'm going to right click and move it to the top. It is a different color, and that will stitch down first, and then we can put the puffy foam on top of it. With this design too, a couple more things with the settings. When I right click on this area, I want to show you what settings that we did change on it. When I right click on the area, I select it. I'll go to my stitch settings, and in here we don't have any underlay. You can see use underlay is deselected. If I go to the satin tab at the top, you can see use auto stitch shortening is off, and the density is down at 0.18. In addition to that, because we do have to make these letters a little bit wider because they are very thin, if I went to the pull compensation and went and made that pull compensation higher. By default it is 0.4, so I'm going to go ahead and put 0.4 so you can see the change. I'll hit apply. You can see that's quite thin. So I bumped it up to 0.6, and if you want to bump it up even higher, this is where you go to do it. So when I hit 0.6, I'll hit apply, and then we'll hit OK. So those are the changes as far as the stitch properties for the puffy foam. Also, you know, you do want to make sure things are going to be divided in such a way and stitched in the correct order for that foam, so we don't have any stitching, you know, going on underneath the satin stitch on top of the foam to mat down that foam.